Quote, known from antiquity and used sporadically throughout the Middle Ages, it was not until the Renaissance and its appearance in the print that the index was made a permanent feature of the book. Unquote. Indexes, or table of contents, were not numbered at first. They were based more on the text itself. Most of the medieval texts began with a fancy letter, and that helped to organize and label the locations in the text. Letters, not page numbers, organized the text. The 1474 edition of The Art of Preaching has an index of 22 pages, full of sentences and phrases, separated by commandments, which began with a letter as tall as 6 lines, and then further separated by sermons, which began with letters as tall as 4 lines. This type of index/organization is flexible in that it doesn't rely on page numbers, so different formats will affect the index. Anti-Oedipus's table of contents is more descriptive than organizational, a reflection of its chaotic philosophy. Rather than inscribing into law a series of events, a series of topics, a series of thoughts, each section has the potential to descriptively change or be added onto. Consisting mostly of sentences, phrases, and descriptions, they are separated by a simple dot. Each section also ends with a dot, as if it is to be continued. The Phenomenology of Spirit table of contents describes the preface in separated descriptive sections, yet all 72 pages of it are taken as whole. The rest of the table is more organizational. It has subdivisions upon subdivisions, but those subdivisions are not themselves numbered. They are also taken as whole and part of the title of that section. Interestingly, it also tells us the page a section begins and the page a section ends, rather than just the page it begins, as is the norm. The table of contents is placed after the translator's introduction, meaning either the translator is externalized from the text, or the table of contents is an integral part of the text, or both are external and the text begins at the preface. Finally, Zizek's jokes has a table of contents consisting of, and this is going to be a long list, so buckle in. 1. The row of jokes. 2. Zizek's jokes. And that's it. Though the non-introductory opening states that there is no offer of a widely known joke, it's a phenomenon of culture, to us, there still has to be an offer, the ultimate beginning, the ultimate other, or perhaps God. The table of contents precisely states as such. The following is from Zizek. The jokes originate from Zizek. There is an offer. And he has decided to introduce his work with the shortest table of contents you have ever seen. There is no point in organizing or labeling, they're all standalone jokes. They may or may not form a philosophical system, who knows. This table of contents immediately tells you what the book is about and what it is not about, who is for and who is not for. It's not for people looking for an in-depth analysis of humor and the external construction of a philosophical system. But doesn't the cover and the title do exactly what the table of content does? Why include a table of contents consisting of basically nothing? Herein lies my most general point. The table of contents is a priori, natural, and must exist. It is essential for organizing, and organizing itself is essential. And based on that notion, the table of contents must therefore be at the start. The table of contents contains in itself a fundamental relation between the writer and the reader. It is external to the text in that sense. It is not a relation to the text, but a relation between the writer and the reader. It declares to the reader, hey, this is what the text will consist of. You'll understand what these titles and sentences mean once you begin reading. Feel free to go back and to the table and flip through the text. The inclusion of the table is an effect of the audience in our heads, the other that is sure to exist once the text is published. Otherwise, if there is no reader, it can also just be a tool of organization for the writer to produce a better, more cohesive text. The text is also then declared to be a carefully manufactured experience rather than a bunch of thoughts. Instead of taking you through the journey of the author, the table of contents allows you to make your own mental journey that is within the limitations of the text. However, this middle ground between the writer and the reader has an instance of mystery and secret, the beginning where the reader has not read the text at all. At that moment, the text still belongs to the author, or rather a version of the author. It belongs to the secrecy of the text itself. Why the titles? Why this title to that title? From point A to point B? Why the sentence beneath the title? The reader cannot answer. The work of the author encompassed entirely within the table, alienating the reader at first until they too, like the author, have finished their work and familiarized themselves with it and its table. The table can thus be massively significant for the author, the final personal touch, the cherry on top of the cake. It is the base for which a reader is supposed to interpret the work, the very beginning, even before the introduction. And as being the final touch, it sets in stone the rest of the text, dictating which goes where for the manufactured experience. The table is not, however, consistent like citations. Each table of contents is different depending on the philosophy of the author. The only thing belonging to the author is the table. The footnote addresses the reader directly rather than indirectly like the table. It therefore alienates itself from the author as it is purely an aid for the reader, reinforcing or creating an interpretation of the main text. Precisely the less knowing of the author, a greater mystery means a lessening of the social aspect of artistic expression. The table, by belonging solely to the author, is not as artistic as the rest of the text, though it may feel more significant since it is the final touch. The table is crude to the reader and beautiful to the writer. The table usually comes after the cover, publisher information, and sometimes a preface or introduction. It's as if it fails to encompass the text if it is not at the start. The table perhaps can't keep the alienation of the reader that has just begun reading if any text is before it. The table being at the beginning is an invitation to flip around even before finishing the text. What if, instead of beginning with a table of contents, you get a vague understanding of the text beforehand, a proper introduction to the text, and an introduction as well to the table? In that case, the table would be an extension of the introduction. It's an introduction just formatted differently and in a list-like form. What if it's at the very end? In that case, you're placed into the shoes of the author who did create the table after finishing their work. The table is most likely fully explained to the reader at that point and most useful as an organizational tool. But, of course, the central declaration by placing it at the end is this: do not flip through my work. Do so only after you have seen it all. The table is reduced to its organizational role through its full explanation. In the cases where the table is not explained, or if the introduction already does its job, the table is reduced to its organizational role through its lack of explanation. Most texts do this. The table does not introduce the text and how it will be structured, rather the introduction after it will. The table is fully externalized by being at the start. You're meant to skip past it. Its significance would surely be increased by its strategic placement and careful consideration of its structure. Some writers purely use it for its function and relegate their art purely to the main text itself. But if Hegel fully integrated its preface into the rest of its phenomenology, then maybe you should integrate the table of contents into your text as well.